SAFE Software is pleased to present the 2009 FME International User Conference. This session is presented by Raymond Kinzer, founder and president of California CAD Solutions. Raymond has more than 22 years of experience in computer modeling and GIS applications and performs product integration, selection, and project management.
Well, good morning. What we ran into this time, we work with a lot of different clients. I've done stuff with GIS and CAD, so we have a lot of AutoCAD background, a lot of Esri background, and work with a lot of large firms. And part of what we find is, as everyone says now, we need to get data from multiple different environments. It's no longer a matter of we have to do it out of here, we have to do it out of a different format here. And working with one particular client, one of the things we were running into was being able to capture data quickly from the field. How many people still have field crews, people they work with that still like paper? They want to go out to the field with a piece of paper, they want to do something. This particular client was having an issue with, there are about, depending on what division you go into, anywhere from 25 to 45,000 field employees that'll be doing work. And one of the IT issues they were running into is how do we deploy, manage, keep up to date, keep the patches on, keep the viruses off, 25 to 30,000 notebooks out in the field. It became just a huge, huge piece of work in the deployment of an IT problem. And so the magnitude of this project is kind of what drove the solution we came to for the entire thing. And one of the issues was we can't get the notebooks out in the field. The other thing they were running into is the sheer volume of data they were having to work with. So what it was is getting ready and preparing for a natural disaster of some sort. One of the things you have to remember is you can't always plan for them. And this particular group, there are over 500,000 individual map pages that they needed to do printing with and converting with and to get mass produced so that they could get them out to the field in a timely manner. Their normal process in the past had been, we print them out, we hope they've been done within the last 2 to 3 years so we have an idea of, is it even what's out in the field, is it current, is it not current. They would then, in crisis situations, mark on the piece of paper, go back to some place where they had a phone line, fax the paper back to a kind of command and control center where someone would then take the faxes as they came off the machine, look at them, run them over to a tech who would then say, okay, this is the data we're going to enter in, this pole is gone, this asset's no longer there, this one's been damaged, so that they could then say, okay, this is what we're going to have to do to go in and clean up and pick up all the pieces and get the system back up and running. And so part of the mandate was we can't make a change too fast. Because when you're trying to deploy a change for 20 to 40,000 people, a teeny change is a huge issue. And so what we had to do was, there's a lot of things we have to deal with. How can we do it to be, the whole bit of not being too disruptive? Paper was still something that people wanted. Okay, we got to do that because people can handle paper. That's the way we're doing it now. Is there any way of kind of doing what we're currently operating in and being able to enable that to be more intelligent so that you can get a byproduct on the other end without having made a huge change in your infrastructure and your way of doing business? And as I was talking with Dale, GeoPDF was one of the new formats that was coming out with FME. And all of a sudden things started to click that part of what they're trying to do is figure out where are our assets that have been damaged. Well, there's that spatial component from a piece of paper. With the GeoPDF, there's a spatial component in the PDF. The other thing we ran into, I don't know how many people have ever heard of ADAPTS. This is another pin that when you mark on a piece of paper, it knows what paper you're marking on, where on the paper you're marking, what application it came from, what machine actually drove the application. So when you then dock the pin back into the computer, it takes all the marks that you made, geo-referenced, and puts them back into the source application. So this is kind of what we are looking at is how can we make this happen, how can we make this work? So now instead of the technician going out with a standard pin, they take this pin out. Okay, it's not a huge change, it's slightly different, but most of the field techs can handle, okay, fine, I'm going to take a piece of paper out, I'm going to make a mark. Now, instead of faxing the paper back in and trying to figure out, is this going to work, is this not going to work, can I read someone what they've done, what they've marked, they then dock the pen, and this will then send the information back to a central center where they'll be able to go in, and they were going to have some SDE servers set up to be able to take this and say, okay, fine, this asset's gone, this one's gone, this one's gone, this one's gone. That's all neat, that's all cool, that's all great. The GeoPDF was a good deal. The other issue we ran into is, how do you, in a timely manner, create, and 500,000 is actually a low estimate. So in excess of 500,000 individual PDFs. Because the other issue they are running into is, I have, if we do take notebooks out in the field, how do I know that the notebook I grabbed is going to have all of the files for the particular area that I'm supposed to go out and service and supposed to go out and survey? And so what they were wanting to do was to be able to have all the PDFs on servers, so each center could say, okay, these are the ones, if I'm going to send you out in the field today, these are the things I need you to do. I can print out the wire center areas that I need you to work with. And so you have the server with all the current files there, be able to print them out, take them out in the field, mark what you need to mark, come back in, and have your markings go back to someone else in the central center where they can do the work that they need to do. So it's the timeliness of that, being able to have the field techs work the way they need to work, but also making 500,000 individual pages. Because part of what we have to realize when you get into 500,000, there is no such thing as small. This is just enormous. If you look at it, 500,000 seconds is almost 6 days. And so anything you can shave off of a process has a profound impact on how does this process work? How, is it a viable thing to be able to do what they're looking at doing? Because they wanted to make this change, but they needed to see, is it actually viable to do? So they had data in SDE, they had data in AutoCAD, they had data all over the place on servers in different locations. They needed to be able to bring this out, and for each individual page, you need a title block around the area to tell you what is this area, when was it printed. This is the other big thing. How current is the data that I'm working with? Is it something that was done a year and a half ago or something that was done a day and a half ago? So to be able to get that information onto the page along with just the information for that particular wire center. So if you have an area that's bounded, you don't want a lot of the adjoining areas information because that's going to be taken care of by another tech on another job. So only this particular area. So being able to use FME to say, I'm going to cut for this polygonal boundary, I want the wires that are in here, I want the poles that are in here, I want the infrastructure only from this particular area. Take that, calculate what it is, clip it out, put it on a page, wrap it in a title block, put the name across the top, put the date that's printed, write it out as a GeoPDF, and stick it on a server somewhere. And so looking at this, having them done all online, all on time, the issue became speed. That I can't wait for this to, start the process before the disaster happens, because a lot of times you have a couple of days extra when you have hurricanes and floods, but an earthquake hits. California, we do a lot with wildfires. We are big fans of wildfires in California. And doing that, they don't usually give you a whole lot of warning. They just tend to march down your throat and burn things up. So being able to go in here and say, I need to have this online all the time, but it needs to be sort of fresh and sort of up to date. And we cannot dedicate a person full-time to do nothing but make these PDFs that someone may or may not use. There may be certain areas that you don't use them for 4 or 5 years. But you're going to have to pay someone to do that and make that and keep that going. That wasn't a real popular idea either. So the traditional methods they had of doing the printing and the plotting, it wasn't working for them. They had some automated scripting, got it down to about 3 minutes a page. They had a custom DLL they were working with. But even at 3 minutes a page, you're looking at almost 3 years of time. Just an extraordinary, and that's running 7 days a week, 365.25 days a year, server never dropping down. Show me a Microsoft server that has ever even thought about operating that long without rebooting. So these are the things they're running into. If we were to say ready, set, go, and this is no human interaction. This is just scripted to where it never has to take any keyboard entry from anyone, just go. We're talking 3 years. Well, now the best you can do is have 3-year-old data. That wasn't going to work for them. So they had to, what can we do? So this is basically where FME comes into play, and you get the stuff in there, and you start looking at how can we perform this better, how can we do it more quickly, how can we do it more efficiently. Oops. So working with FME Server is what we were looking at for this. Prototyped it on the desktop with them. Creating GeoPDFs from the data source took less than half a second. It was 0.41 seconds per page. And this was to pull from a remote SDE server and from AutoCAD files and to then place it on a remote server. So they were also looking at picking up speed in the entire process by having where the output files are going to be written to be on the same machine, and then to put a faster drive array on. So this was just using the existing equipment they had on the existing network connections they had to test the speed of it. So all of a sudden you look at this, 0.41 seconds each. Now in basically 2.5 days, you're done with the process. Okay, this starts making a lot of sense. Now you don't have to have a person dedicated full-time running this. You have an FME routine that runs. If you need it done faster, you throw another server into the process. So you put 2 servers in. You could have this to where you could have a daily refresh of your entire system done in a GeoPDF format to be able to do the work they needed to do. The other benefit they ran into this, there's always multiple groups and organizations that are this big. I want to do this, I want to do that, and you always have, I have 4 mandates from this group, 2 mandates from this group, 3 mandates from this group. They all think they're asking for the same thing, and they're all kind of counterintuitive in what they're asking for. What they wanted here was they wanted the GeoPDFs because they could grab that portion of it. There's also a large AutoCAD group within this organization that wanted the DWFs, which are, I don't know how many people are familiar with DWF. It is a kind of a drawing web format. It's a sort of a PDF format that Autodesk has come up with that actually has a lot of good stuff in it with a free viewer. So there's an entire group that wanted that. Well, what's the first thing you do with FME when someone says, well, I need GeoPDFs, and someone else says, I need DWFs? So you had the entire process done, so you say, okay, add DWF to the entire process and point it to a different subdirectory. And so I think that one added, it made it like 0.45 seconds per page to be able to do the whole thing, to be able to run it out, because the most time of this process was getting across the network to the SDE server to then query out and do the spatial clip on the entire nation as far as the data they were bringing in. And so once again, you have the whole concept of what do you want to do? FME, it's like, I'm going to do this, set the server up. We were looking at having a separate server for the GeoPDFs and a separate server for the DWFs, depending on which group and how they're doing their work and what area we're actually saving the files to. So looking at this, it all worked. 0.41 seconds, 2.4 days instead of basically 3 years. And this became a process, and I got to work on my clicking, don't I? So the data sources they had here were the AutoCAD title blocks, SDE layers, and doing other multiple outputs. The other thing they were looking at was to have a real-time response in their disaster center to be able to say, okay, the information that's coming back from the field when you mark up on the paper that's coming up back off of the pen, how about if we take that and put it into KML, and then you have the whole Google Earth, this is where things are going out. So when you're wanting to see something very quickly, and you say, okay, this is where we got problems, we're doing okay here, but we're deader than a doornail over in this area. So being able to do that and bring it in, all the different formats that come in with safe software kind of worked in, and the speed. Once again, it boils down to you don't have to have a person sitting there doing this. You set the process up. You have the server just automatically fire this process off, and it gets taken care of. And that was really the big thing that drove the entire process through here was it was happened quickly, and it didn't require a dedicated person to keep the process up and running. Good grief. So the other thing they were doing is looking for the markup on the pins, is being able to take this. The other nice part about the pin, and if anyone's ever worked with these, what it does is you mark on the paper, and now you have an automatic backup, because the paper then becomes the backup of what did we do in case something happens when you dock the pen and it sends the ink, you know, as they call it, sends the ink back to the dispatch center. The other thing that that was just done is ADAPS has just recently come up with a SharePoint version of the software. Because in the past, I don't know how many people have heard of them in the past, you keep shaking your head like you've seen what's going on. It's been locked to the machine, so if you have an ArcGIS app that writes a printout, the print knows that's the application it came from, it knows the machine it came from, and so it sends it back to the correct location. Well, that works really good until you're a nationwide organization, and I may have prints coming from 150 different locations, but I all want them to come back right here. Now how do I deal with it? That had been an issue that we were addressing, and ADAPS has now come up with a SharePoint add-on so that you can tell it, I don't care where you printed it, I don't care what machine it came from, this is where I want the information to go back. So they can now control, from a nationwide aspect, they can control the logistics of here's where everything is going to come back in, keeping it in. And the other part was, since it was marked on a GeoPDF, it knew spatially where it was, and it came back in coordinate space. Their high-tech version of this was to take a piece of paper and say, oh, this pole is gone, X. That's all they were doing. They were putting an X across the pole, and then they'd fax that in. And so it wasn't that we had to capture extraordinarily complex information. We just had to capture the fact that this pole is gone. This pole is gone. This line is down. And so this entire process feeds very, very well. And when you're sending people out in the field, there are no passwords on this. You don't have to worry about someone surfing with this. You don't have to worry about anything. It is very secure, very easy, very inexpensive to deploy in the field. And that was the other thing. When you're looking at 20 to 30,000 people out in the field, inexpensive starts making a lot of sense. And then you don't have the IT headaches that are going along with it. So that was pretty much what drove the whole thing. They're in the process now of doing this in a multi-stage process so that you can, first we're going to give them paper. Get people used to marking on paper. Then you just kind of slip them a new pen, and then they're happy with that. And then you change the way that the ink goes back. And so the entire process works the way they're used to working, so you don't get a lot of pushback from the field. That's the other thing we run into a lot, is if you try to make too much change too quickly, it's like, you know what, forget it. I'm used to doing it this way, that's how I'm going to do it. And no matter what you do, how cool you make it, how techy it is, how cool it is, there's always going to be someone that, you know what, I don't like doing it that way. I like the way I used to do it. And we're finding more and more just going back to paper and to clipboard. It is a highly, highly adopted method for work out in the field, because that's what people are used to. And so they don't resist, they take it, they run, and we then get, on the technical side of things, we get the information we need in the format we need. The guys out in the field that don't want to deal with that don't have to deal with it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, being able to give us what we need and letting them do it in the way they want to do it. So it's, none of this technology is brand spanking new, but it's all the application. This has been around for several years. It's the application of put this, together with this, and you get FME in the middle to be able to process it enough that it became a viable solution for them.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thank you very much.